Since the death penalty is never coming back to this country, then at the very least, anyone who commits a murder should, in my view, just be locked up for absolutely ever. If we had that as a principle of sentencing, then the stories that I'm about to present just wouldn't have happened. Enjoy.
Right, start the same thing at the moment. For the me army defence, I'm answering questions, subsequently anything you do, same evidence. Anything you say now is evidential, alright?
I know he's on, so it can't be like.
Brian Whitelock, who comes from Swansea in Wales, is another triple murderer. His first two victims were Nicky Morgan and Glen Whitelock. Glen was his own brother. He killed them in the course of a drink and drugs party over at the home of Nicky Morgan. Now viewer, if I've got you hooked on the story so far, do subscribe, give the video a like, drop a comment when you're ready and donate. Hit the thanks button below, I'll appreciate you. When he got out, he then was befriended by a lady called Wendy Buckney. She was a 71-year-old lady. She loved her horses. She knew about Brian Whitelock's past, but she believed that everyone deserved a second chance. One day, under the influence of drink and drugs again, just like in the case of his first two murders, he went over to Wendy Buckney's home, battered her, did something sexual against her, and then after he finished battering her to death with all kinds of things, including some shelving, he loaded a pile of furniture and things over her body and walked away. He got his whole life prison order in 2024. Eerily enough, before jointly murdering a lady called Quen and Gok Nguyen in August 2017, Stephen Unwin and William McFall had each murdered a pensioner and done time for that. They got Miss Nguyen to come to a property under false pretences, and then Unwin raped her, and then afterwards he drove her to a remote location and set her on fire. He then drove to a cash machine and withdrew money from her bank account while the lady burned. The two men got their whole life order in 2018. Stephen Sansom is a double murderer. His first murder came in Christmas 1998, where he killed a taxi driver just for a few quid. He rammed a kitchen knife, I think, into the guy's neck, and then he destroyed the man's mobile phone to make sure that he couldn't call for help. Then he got out, and for a year or two he was fine, didn't get into any trouble, but he kept taking drugs. He got involved with a woman called Gemma Watts, and she was just as bad as him. She liked to BDSM. She used to let Sansom beat the crap out of her, and between the two of them they plotted that they would get a woman to come over and hack her to bits or kill her in some way. So then one day they got an ex-girlfriend, or somebody at least that Sansom had dated for a while, by the name of Sarah Mayhew, who in fact was the one who introduced Gemma to Sansom. It's not known exactly what they did to her to cause her death, because when several weeks later her body was found, it was all in pieces and it was very badly decomposed, so it was impossible to trace exactly what had been done to her. Gemma got 30 years for Sarah Mayhew's murder because that was her first murder. In the case of Sansom, however, it was his second murder which led him to getting a whole life order. That came in early 2025. Mark Robinson was born in 1962. At 17, he joined the RAF. On the 27th of May 1979, he was home on leave for the spring bank holiday. He went round to the home of one of his neighbours, a 32-year-old woman called Patricia Wagner, who was a wife and a mother. He actually tricked his way into her house by pretending that he was drunk and had mistaken the house. In any case, the two got talking, had sex apparently, according to Robinson, and it came on his instigation. But then at the end, Mrs. Wagner apparently said that if Robinson didn't tell his mother that they had just had sex, she herself would, and apparently the thought of his mother finding out what he'd done with his married next door neighbour was just too terrifying to Robinson, and so he got hold of the cord of a lamp in Mrs. Wagner's home, wrapped it round her neck and strangled her to death. In March 1989, he came out of prison having done the 10-year minimum term of the life sentence that he got for Mrs. Wagner's murder. He met a 25-year-old lady called Sharon Morley in Wakefield. The couple soon moved to Billingham, and that started lots of arguments between the couple, all because Sharon wanted to move back to Wakefield. On the 19th of September 1989, Robinson discovered a photo of one of Sharon's former boyfriends, and in the argument that followed, he beat and stabbed Sharon to death. His original life sentence, which he got in 1989 for Sharon's murder, was later upgraded, thankfully, to a whole life order. Ian Birley's first murder was that of 69-year-old Maurice Hoyle, and for that murder he did 18 years. And then in July 2015, when he was 43, together with his girlfriend, a 39-year-old called Helen Nichols, he followed a 65-year-old man called John Gogarty to his home in Roomwell, which is near Barnsley in South Yorkshire, before demanding his PIN and then stabbing him 69 times. The girlfriend, Helen Nichols, got 20 years for the murder, while Birley got whole life. That happened in 2015. On the night of the 21st of June 1971, a steelworker from Cardiff in his mid-20s by the name of Malcolm Green slashed the throat of a 41-year-old woman with a broken bottle. The woman's name was Glenys Johnson, and she happened to be a sex worker that the perpetrator, who murdered this stranger on wasteland near the local docks, had come across. As well as causing a 5-inch wound to Glenys's neck, which nearly decapitated the woman, Green cut several other parts of his victim's body as well, the body subsequently being found half naked and lying face down under a car in a nearby street. In police custody, the perpetrator's confession, which came as soon as the man sat down to be interviewed, but which the man later retracted, said, quote, "I don't know how I done it. All I had was a comb and a shilling. The next thing I knew, I was walking home smothered in blood. I know I did it," unquote. After doing what he did, Green had gone to his workplace, British Steel Corporation's East Moors work, which was nearby, to shower, change, wash his blood-stained clothes, and make a taunting phone call to the police in which he said, quote, "Have you found the body yet? There will be 4 more. This is the Ripper," unquote. That very phone call, though, was then traced to Green's workplace, and the murder itself was then traced to Green, which had to have made the man feel like a total fool. After arresting the perpetrator, police learned that he had told his wife, Marilyn, a few months earlier that he wondered what killing someone would be like. Following that, in their subsequent search of the man's home, police found a dummy made out of a rolled-up carpet, dressed in a shirt and coat, with a knife embedded in its chest and with a red substance staining the area of the stab point. In November 1971, at what was then Cardiff Assize Court, for Glenys's murder, Green got life with a minimum of 25 years. On the 22nd of March 1990, a motorist found in the 2 holdalls that she had spotted sitting by the A467 near Rogerston in Newport, South Wales, 2 upper arms, 2 legs and a torso. All the body parts were individually wrapped in plastic and sealed with sellotape. 4 days later, a young farmer who came from St Bride's, Whitelock, some 15 miles away from Newport, found, wrapped in a plastic bag, a severed and bludgeoned head. Nearby, meanwhile, was a white plastic bag containing 2 amputated hands, with the 3rd finger on the left hand completely crushed. These body parts had come from a 24-year-old New Zealander by the name of Clive Tully, who was last seen alive on the 19th of March in Bristol, southwest England. On that day, Clive, who was broke at this point, had asked a friend of his to put him up for the night. Having agreed to do so and then dropped the man off at his home, Malcolm Green, who'd come out of prison 5 months before, later bludgeoned Clive, his friend, with a hammer and then sawed his body into pieces before bagging it and then scattering it in the bags along rural roads down in South Wales. It's hard to see where, between having been born in 1946, ending up as one of 12, losing one of his brothers to a horrific train accident in 1965, getting married at 21 and working as a crane driver at a steelworks, Green developed his evident bloodlust. Before working as a crane driver, he had worked at a slaughterhouse, as do many other people who don't go on to kill. At the end of his 1991 trial for what was dubbed the body in the bag murder, Green got another 25-year sentence. As at the time of this recording, however, the perpetrator was still locked up because Kenneth Baker, the Home Secretary at the time of the man's sentencing, promptly upgraded the perpetrator's sentence to a whole life term. And I, for one, am fucking glad. In February 1989, together with a friend of his, 17-year-old Paul Glen went to steal 5,000 quid from a local guesthouse owner called Ivor Usher. Believing the money was stashed in the safe, the pair tied Mr. Usher to a chair, but for some reason, Glen suddenly went mad and bludgeoned the man to death with a bar stool and a wrench. Afterwards, in an effort to cover his tracks, he set the place on fire. Glen was jailed for life, but he got out on licence in 2002 after doing 13 years. On getting out, the man followed in the footsteps of John Childs and became a hitman. Having accepted a contract to kill a bloke called Vincent Smart, armed with a kitchen knife, Glen travelled down from Liverpool to Farset in Cambridgeshire, where his target lived. On reaching the man's house, Glen kicked the door down, stormed up to his victim, who was in the middle of making dinner with his girlfriend, and stabbed him repeatedly in the hands, the arms and the chest, one stab going through the man's heart. While Glen was killing his target, the girlfriend of the victim went and hid behind a sofa. She was unharmed. In 2005, given his previous murder conviction, Glen got a whole life order. And by the way, in the contract killing that he carried out, he offed the wrong bloke. Mr. Smart wasn't in, you see, when Glen came calling. His housemate, Robert Bogle, was, and that's who Glen murdered. The murderer seemed not to have even got the basics of contract killing right, including knowing how one's target actually looks, although arguably his contractors held an equal share of the blame for that. Mr. Bogle was black. Glen's intended victim, however, was white. David Baxendale was born in 1971. In 2001, out in Spain, he got 11 years for the murder of his friend, who he stabbed 14 times while he was under the influence of drink and drugs. After only 7 years, though, in June 2008, he was released and deported back to the UK. On the 10th of May 2010, a friend of his who lived in a flat in Redhill, he met this lady called Sarah Thomas, and the two seemed to have, got a liking for one another, and then they got a taxi back to Sarah's flat around 5 p.m. She lived in High Street, Nutfield Village, and then for reasons that I just don't know, Baxendale murdered her. He stabbed her several times with the fatal wound going straight through her neck. In March 2011, Baxendale got his whole life prison order. Marc Chivers, who was born in 1967, is the son of a British Army officer who was serving in Germany. Chivers was born and raised in Germany. In 1986, he met a lady called Sabine Rappold, and she soon became his girlfriend. In 1992, he strangled her with a rope and then buried her body in a shallow grave in Woodland and went on the run. He was caught and arrested 3 months later, and in 1993 he got a life sentence in Stuttgart. After doing 15 years for the murder of Sabine, in 2007 he was released but deported back to the UK. In July 2008, he had a girlfriend by this point and he attacked her. Her name was Maria Stubbings. He got 4 months in jail for battery of Maria, but they stayed together, and there were a number of other occasions when Chivers got out that Maria called the police on him, but nothing came of it until one point the police came round after Maria Stubbings got them over, but Chivers is the one who answered the door, and he told the police that she'd gone out. And then a few days later, in fact it was the very next day, they came round the first occasion on the 18th of December 2008. And they came back the next day and they found Maria's body, which was hidden under a pile of clothes in the downstairs bathroom. This time Chivers strangled her with a dog lead. Perhaps he just didn't have any rope handy. He got his whole life order in December 2009. Lawrence Bierton, who was born in 1959, is a triple murderer. On the 25th of June 1995, 79-year-old Aileen Duddell and her 72-year-old sister Elsie Gregory discovered their gardeners, Lawrence Bierton and Michael Pluck, stealing from them. Bierton and Pluck reacted by bludgeoning and suffocating the sisters to death. They then piled the sisters' living room furniture over the bodies of their victims and set everything on fire. Both men were jailed for life at Sheffield Crown Court in 1996. In February 2012, Pluck died in prison. Bierton, however, was released from prison on licence in 2017. He was recalled to prison in 2018 but released on licence once again in 2020. On the 9th of November 2021 in Worksop, Nottinghamshire, Bierton battered his 73-year-old neighbour Pauline Quinn to death with her own coffee table. The cause of death was traumatic head injuries. Bierton's abuse of drug and alcohol was considered by the prosecution to be a contributing factor to the man's acts. Bierton got his whole life order in 2023. Born in 1950, in 1975, Michael Smith met a 19-year-old woman by the name of Sheila Deakin and the two became a couple. However, the relationship was fraught in some way from the very off, and in an argument over a previous boyfriend of Sheila's, Smith strangled his girlfriend to death. Smith did 30 years for that murder. He learned nothing from that punishment though, since in August 2006 he battered his mate Peter Summers to death with a champagne bottle before stealing 8,000 quid from the man's home, this having been his reason for what he did. With that second murder, in May 2007, Smith got forever, a whole life prison sentence of course. Born in 1971, in 1989, Desmond Lee murdered his landlady, Shirley Carr, by strangling her with his bare hands. His reason for killing her was that she had taunted him over the breakup of his first gay relationship. He pled not guilty to murder but was convicted anyway, and he did 14 years and he got out in 2004. Now, after getting out, he got a new boyfriend, a man called Christopher Pratt, who was actually a married father of two. And then on one occasion, the 15th of August 2009 to be exact, over at Mr. Pratt's home in Sackville Street, Lee killed his lover by breaking his voice box and by breaking a bone in his neck. The body of Mr. Pratt was still in the flat when Lee stole the man's credit card and debit cards, and with those cards he paid off a phone bill, bought alcohol for a party with his neighbours, ordered more than £200 worth of food from Asda and attempted to buy £1,181 worth of goods from Argos. In court, this time he admitted to killing Mr. Pratt, but he claimed it was a freak sex accident. In April 2010, he got his whole life order. George Johnson is a double murderer. He did 20 years of a life sentence for a murder that he committed in the course of a burglary that came in 1986. Then when he got out in 2011, he murdered 89-year-old Florence Habish in February in order to get money to fund his drug addiction. It was a fully premeditated murder as well. He got his whole life order in 2011. Alan Maidment has got convictions for robberies and for possessing a knife and for 2 murders. He got his first murder conviction and he served his time and then he got out. But then 9 months later, in 2017, he murdered again. It was a man that he believed had assaulted his girlfriend. He murdered that man by stabbing him 32 times. He got his whole life order in 2017. Andrew Dawson, who was born in 1962, has killed all of 3 people in his lifetime, and he did so between 1981 and 2010. In August 1981, in his native Ormskirk up in Lancashire, Dawson murdered his first victim, Henry Walsh. Mr. Walsh was a shopkeeper who was 91 years old at the time of his murder, and Dawson stabbed the man 11 times. Dawson was convicted of Mr. Walsh's murder in 1982, but was released on licence in 1999. On the 25th of July 2010, John David Matthews was found stabbed to death in his flat in the Derby area of Chaddesden. 5 days later, in the same area, Paul Hancock was also fatally stabbed. And you'll never guess who stabbed them both. On both occasions, Dawson placed the bodies of his victims in a bathtub of their respective flat so that he could get rid of their odours. On the same day that Matthew's body had been found, Dawson was arrested in Whitehaven, which is in Cumbria. On the 18th of July 2011, he got his whole life order. Ian McLoughlin was born in 1958. Between 1970 and 1983, he was in and out of prison for a range of offences, including burglary and theft. In 1983, he beat his boyfriend, Lendell Gatty, over the head with a hammer and then strangled him with a towel. He was convicted of manslaughter and got 10 years, but that was reduced on appeal to 8 years, and then the man was released after only 5 years anyway. In September 1991, he got his new boyfriend, a barman called Peter Halls, to lie on the bed in a fantasy game and then killed him by stabbing him in the back. In 1992, he got life with a minimum of 25 years. In July 2012, he was let out of prison on day release, and he decided to use that day release to go around the home of ex-prisoner and SE ex-offender, 86-year-old Francis Corey Wright, who he'd met in prison, and rob him. And so that's what he did. He tied Corey Wright up while he searched his house, and he was just about to leave with a pillowcase full of family heirlooms when a neighbour by the name of Graham Buck came over to investigate the shouting that he'd heard. McLoughlin dragged Mr. Buck into the house and then killed him by stabbing him in the neck. In 2014, the 40-year minimum term that McLoughlin had got in 2013 for the murder of Mr. Buck was upgraded to a whole life order. Paul O'Hara's first murder was that of his girlfriend Janine Waterworth in, I think, 1998, or at least that's when he was sentenced for her murder. And then he was released around 2013, and of course, on being released, he went over to the home of his new girlfriend, Shirley Shenan, and that's where she was given evidence to 2 police officers about the domestic abuse that she'd suffered at the hands of O'Hara. He burst in, attacked the 2 police officers with a hammer, chased Shenan into the street, and then on catching up with her, he stabbed her to death. He got his whole life order in 2014. Double murderer David Mitchell, who was born around 1968, is gay. However, originally he was straight. The proof of that is the fact that in 1990 he murdered his girlfriend. He did his second murder, which was that of his gay lover, Robert Hind, 4 months after getting out of prison for the murder of his girlfriend. He murdered Robert Hind in the hostel that they were both living in after getting out of prison, where they met in December 2013. And his apparent reason for the murder was that he was really angry when, after they had sex, Hind told him that he was HIV positive. The court, however, when this came to trial, didn't believe him for a minute. They reckoned that he had known about it long before then, and therefore, that wasn't the reason why he killed Robert Hind. He got his whole life order in 2015. Anthony Ayres, another man who killed 2 women several years apart, with a prison sentence for the first murder coming in between. So his first murder is the one that he committed in 1994, and the woman that he murdered was none other than his girlfriend. After he got out, which he did in May 2012, he kept a low profile for 3 years, and then on the 19th of November 2015, for whatever reason, he murdered 36-year-old mother of one, Kelly Pierce, at a friend's flat in Canvey in Essex. He stabbed Kelly 40 times and then beat her to death. He got his whole life order in 2016. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.